All right, welcome to NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode is on the Atlanta Falcons. I am joined by Michael Quirk from the Spaghetti Junction Boys. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I've been Falcons Twitter can be an interesting place. I'm guessing these times right now. I've been excited and interested to get someone on talking about the Falcons. So I definitely appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to talk Falcons. And in Georgia, we sort of live in a state of existential dread when it comes to college and professional sports teams. Georgia 12-0 going into the SEC title game, and there was still just you could breathe in the nervous energy from Georgia fans, just knowing something bad was going to happen. Even in the World Series, it was just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it luckily never did. Hopefully that can get the spirits a little bit feeling better in the city.
Well, I was gonna say, quarterback wise, Tua could never be an Atlanta Falcon, could he?
I
With that,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, that still is a horrible, horrible memory.
yeah,
Right to Devontae Smith. I don't think that'll ever be forgotten within the state.
yeah. I mean, when you look at quarterback, that's obviously an important position in the NFL. We know Tua is probably not going to be a Falcon, but talk a little bit about one of the main positions, the present and future of Matt Ryan, and what's really wrong with him this year. Because I've had him on my dynasty team, and I've super flex, and I've tried to start him, and it just hasn't worked. What's going on with him this year?
Well, Matt Ryan has been plagued by two big franchise issues with the Falcons. The first of which is they've not evaluated well on the offensive line. They've spent tons and tons of draft capital. They've spent money on the offensive line, and it's really, really bad. It's sort of like just because you have money doesn't mean that you have class. Sure, it helps if you spend high draft picks on the line, but it's not a guarantee. And so not having the time there certainly hurts. And then on the flip side, the other big problem the Falcons have had is after that loss in the Super Bowl, the Falcons have tried to keep extending that window even as the team got worse and worse. And so they got themselves into a horrible, horrible cap situation that spelled the end of Julio Jones, that showed, hey, maybe we shouldn't spend big money on running backs after we did that with Tevin Coleman and Freeman. And then now you just have Mike Davis back there. Kind of have to do something by committee there. So he doesn't have a ton of help there. And he has one of the biggest cap hits in the league. And in 2022, it's going to be the biggest cap hit in the league. And so there's not a lot of space to go out and get that help for him. And he's getting up there in years. He was drafted. We're getting close to a decade and a half ago out of Boston College that he's getting into those later years where you see it arrive sooner than others. Not everyone is a freak like Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers is still playing at a high level. But Drew Brees, you saw him fall off a cliff at the end.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen Ben Roethlisberger. My God.
Yeah.
And so he's getting toward the tail end of his career, but you can't cut him. No one's going to trade for that contract and can't really afford help around him. So it's really a rock and a hard place at this point.
And so you talked about that running back position. What happened with Mike Davis? I mean, he was supposed to be the guy, and he hasn't really been the guy. I mean, what has happened with him, or has it maybe just been what's behind him that's really been better?
Yeah, it's sort of a chicken or the egg kind of thing. Where is Mike Davis not running the ball because they can't stretch the field, so you have teams crowding the box, or are are they not able to stretch the field because they can't run the ball? So it's really interesting to kind of see that. But Mike Davis, people thought, hey, you know what? There's a reason that Todd Gurley's not a Falcon any longer. There's a reason that they're not really pursuing any of these veteran backs that have come and gone as far as availability goes. It's there's been some moments with Mike, but yeah, it certainly hasn't been there in the in the years that you've come to know in the past of the Warwick Dunns, the Michael
Mhm.
Turners, where the Falcons have a pretty decent lineage going back to Jamal Anderson, the Dirty Bird, of good
They do.
running backs in their town.
Absolutely, and maybe part of it is Cordarelle Patterson. I mean, talk about the re-emergence of him. I mean, because I'm a Bears fan, and I had a chance to see him at the 2019 training camp, and I just don't know if the Bears were using him properly, or but what's really behind him kind of you know doing so well this year.
It's fascinating to watch because no one has used him like Arthur Smith and the Falcons are
Mhm,
using him this year. And he has more rushing attempts than anyone else on the team,
mhm,
and he's 6'2".
mhm,
He's a huge quote unquote running back
mhm,
where he's been a specialist basically his entire career. And he's over 30 now. And you don't usually see returners or running backs reaching their best years after the age of 30. That's typically a graveyard sentence for guys like Patterson.
and is he going to be back next year? Or is he just was he on a 1-year deal?
I'm not actually sure, but I think that that's something that would work for both sides, wanting him to be back because right now, with Calvin Ridley's absence, with Julio Jones out of town, and Kyle Pitts has had a tremendous rookie year, but you've seen a lot of inconsistency on that offense, and Patterson has been the one who's out there making plays. And if you're Patterson, why would you want to leave the one team that you finally found yourself
Mhm.
in a place where they use you in a variety of ways and are really able to showcase your skill set like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense for both parties to keep this one going as long as it can.
Yeah, and you talked about, Kyle Pitts. He kind of, I don't know, it was a little bit slower start, but talk about his growth and what you see him. I mean, he was obviously highly touted, fantasy wise, and as the second coming, right? What have you seen from him that you like so far, and maybe what do you see from him that he needs to improve on?
Man, he is an absolute nightmare. You
Mhm,
saw him at Florida and you
mhm,
said, "There's no way that doesn't translate." And he's the highest drafted tight end in NFL history. I believe Mike Ditka was also drafted at fifth. I could have that wrong, but um, he's too big for your guys in the secondary, and he's too fast for linebackers. And I heard a lot of people say, "Oh, he's more of a wide receiver than a tight end." Fine. It
mhm,
doesn't matter how you want to label him. You see a guy like Mike Gesicki, a guy like Evan Ingram, who aren't terrific blockers, but are great receiving tight ends. And that's something that you've really seen the NFL evolve into with your George Kittle, with your Mark Andrews, with your Travis Kelsey, that the days are really gone of, hey, you need a tight end who can just get down and block and spring a running back free. Now it's, hey, those guys aren't just for blocking and 3 targets a game. If you can find one of those big, fast, lumbering dudes who can open it up down the middle of the field, it's so difficult to defend. And it's so great for an offense that either has a young quarterback, which the Falcons may have in the next couple of years, almost will certainly have in the next couple of years, or at the very least, a quarterback who have a time having a safety net like that, where just hey, throw it up and hope Kyle Pitts can be there. He's been really everything that you hoped he could be if you're a Falcons fan. There's a lot of holes on the team that could have been filled through the draft with a pick like that. But I mean, spend the number 4 pick on a tight end seems a bit crazy, but then see what he's done. And my God, it's unbelievable to see what he's done already, living up to the hype. And it's something that you really have to be excited about in Atlanta.
and so he's kind of been more like stretching the field, middle of the field. Like he's only got. I was looking. I'm kind of surprised by this. He only has one touchdown this season, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's the leading receiver for the Falcons right now, and unless you get Patterson out in space, Patterson has 40 plus catches as well this year. Defenses are keying in on Kyle Pitts because how many how many average NFL fans can name an Atlanta Falcon wide receiver who's not Calvin Ridley?
Right.
And so you may have someone go, "Hey, Roddy White's probably still there at some point, right?"
Or
Um,
or even like pronounce, I don't even, I know I've been pronouncing, the, Zacchaeus or
I mean, you have Russell Gage, who was famous
yeah.
here in Atlanta for testing his hands by catching bricks, which whenever he had a drop after that came out, really lent itself to some very low hanging fruit. But once a guy like Calvin Ridley comes back, and you're interested to see what sort of guys they take in the draft, who they start targeting there to get some more targets, replenish that room a bit, especially with kind of the uncertain future with Calvin Ridley. I think that'll help Kyle Pitts even more.
Absolutely. And, speaking of Ridley, what are you hearing about his return? And, is it going to be this season or, talk about that. And then obviously what Gage brings. And then also you've got Tajay Sharp. I don't know how much he's really played a role either.
It's been really quiet on the Calvin Ridley front. That was something that was kind of interesting to see him missing quite a bit of action, and then of course stepping away fully. And so they're really giving him that time to make sure that he gets everything right there. And you're happy to see that, because too often in a violent sport like football is, and a sport that's long been, oh yeah, rub some dirt on it, get back out there, and so
Mhm.
forth. Here's some smelling salts. Uh, that seeing him take away that time and get that time is great to see. It is, of course, frustrating Falcon fans on Sunday, because ideally they'd like to see Ridley out there because he's a tremendous player. But it'll be really interesting to see what that timeline is, especially with the Falcons in the playoff hunt, and especially with the Falcons trading away Julio Jones, saying, "Hey, you were a really good number two receiver. We believe you can be a really good number one receiver." And so he's a big part of the future. So really hope that he can get that right and come back and help the franchise.
Yeah, and it is mental health is huge, especially in NFL, and then hopefully that's something that teams are getting right now that you're right that they didn't used to do. And when you talk about the Falcons, um, you definitely want to. I mean, I'm sure they're not winning a Super Bowl this year, so you're looking toward the future. You want to kind of protect his future, but also protect the future of the franchise as well.
Yeah, and that's something that, going back to what I said about trying to extend that window, is something that I think a lot of NFL teams miss on, is that they look to say, "Hey, we're so close to making the playoffs. If you just get to the playoffs, you just have to get hot at the right time." But what you really need to do is look at the best teams in the NFL and say, "How close are we to that? Are we close to what the Chiefs were the last few years? Are we close to what the Packers and the Cardinals are now? Close to what the Rams are now?" And the Falcons aren't. The
Right.
Falcons very well could find themselves as a 6 or 7 seed in the NFC, because of how tremendously soft that bubble is. I
Hmm.
mean, maybe the best 4 teams in the NFL are all in the NFC, but then after that, there's a precipitous fall off. That the Falcons really do need to be looking toward the future and trying to figure out, what do we know that we have. We talked about Tua earlier in the episode, and Tua, that's the biggest thing for the Dolphins. The Dolphins could also sneak into the 6 or 7 spot in the AFC in that just cluttered mess. But that's what the Dolphins really need to focus on, is, do we know what we have in Tua? And so with the Falcons, hey, who do we know that we can rely upon on the offensive line? Who can we invest on there? We know we have Kyle Pitts. We'd like to keep Patterson around. Matt Ryan, will see what he can do moving forward. You really want to know what you can do with him, but you also don't really need a definitive answer there, because you're stuck with him for better or worse for the foreseeable future. And that defense has been an absolute zoo. It came together during the Super Bowl year when you had guys like Keanu Neal, who's now in Dallas. You had Devondre Campbell. You had a lot of guys who came together at once. You have Vic Beasley having a terrific year there, Tack McKinley, and now you have those guys here, there, everywhere. But they've started to rebuild that defense. You really think AJ Terrell could be something special? That seemed like an overdraft at the time, especially with some of the more highly touted prospects that a lot of folks had going before him. But he's played really, really well this year. So I think it's all about knowing what exactly do we have. If we make the playoffs, great. We're not making a run, especially in that monster that is the NFC. But what do we have?
Speaking of that, what do you see the strengths and the weaknesses of the defense? I mean, they had didn't they have a pick six this past weekend, right?
Yeah, and so right, having a lockdown corner, which Trufant was for years in Atlanta, and just like Atlanta's always seemed to have really good running back play, they always seem to have a good lockdown corner. Of course, you had prime time here for a little bit. You had big play Ray. I think AJ needs a nickname at some point. But the Falcons, as has been the case for a long time, need to fix the pass rush. You absolutely need to fix that. This is a league where you have to have good quarterback play. I think Matt Ryan, it's still there. I don't think he is the problem. It hasn't been what you want to see, but I don't think he's the problem. You want to have good protection, which obviously the Falcons do not have. And you want to have a guy who can beat that good protection and get to that quarterback on the other side for you. And the Falcons don't have that guy. I mean, you look around the league, how close is anyone on the Falcons to being a Myles Garrett? There's not Myles Garrett's growing on trees. There's not J.J. Watt's growing on trees. But you need someone that you can rely upon there, or at least build out some depth where you can do that by committee, keep fresh bodies, and go and get the quarterback. And the Falcons just haven't been able to do that consistently for years.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You say cap wise, so they can't even go out and get anybody. The Bengals, they've paid their defensive front quite a bit. But yeah, so their Falcons are really stuck there.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate spot that Dimitrov put the franchise in, while still trying to honestly put Band-Aids on bullet hole wounds. And so fixed a little bit of that over the last offseason, but the NFL cap situation, which I think there's only 32 people in this world who fully understand the NFL salary cap. I hear a new provision seemingly every day, but it's going to take some time to get through that. It's going to take getting out of some bad contracts. It's going to take some eating some dead money, some dead cap hits, to eventually rebuild. But the right steps are there. I think the right people are in place. And I think when it comes to, like I was saying about knowing what you have, I think you have to feel pretty happy about Arthur there.
Yeah, talk about Arthur Smith. I mean, finding definitely have gone through some seemingly good coaches, but it's kind of fallen off after a year or two. Great Arthur Smith. The Titans are definitely missing him quite a bit, I believe. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing positive from him.
Yeah, it's like you said. It always seems like the Falcons may have found their coach, Mike Smith, and then huge drop off. Dan Quinn got to the Super Bowl, huge drop off. And why they went and got Arthur Smith is you usually see someone go offense, defense when they're hiring head coaches. A lot of times because one side of the ball was neglected a bit. But also there's, I think, a psychology study that says when someone has, a white car, then the next time they get a blue or black car and vice versa and so forth. And so Arthur Smith going out and getting him and seeing what he did to revive Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill was just discarded into the scrap pile of quarterbacks that didn't pan out. Like you see with a guy like Mitch Trubisky going up to Buffalo, or Gardner Minshew, who's now enjoying his resurgence up in Philadelphia. But you saw what he was able to do with Tannehill, where a lot of the advanced metrics on what he was doing were unbelievable. And he was using his legs more. He was finding a lot more easy throws for Tannehill. He was finding ways to stretch a defense. And a lot of that is obviously Derrick Henry. And you want to talk about guys who aren't just popping up around every corner. There's not a lot of, oh, let's go get a Derrick Henry.
Right.
And so, but you saw a lot of exotic looks out of that offense in Tennessee, and Atlanta said, "Hey, give us some of that." It was there's a lot of scheme, and then there's a lot of X's and O's, a lot of Jimmys and Joes. They had the Jimmys and Joes, but you saw that X's and O's of what they were doing in Tennessee. So you don't know if that's always going to translate, but it appears that it has, because you see, like we talked about, Cordarelle Patterson, seeing what he's done in Atlanta, being used in a lot of different and interesting ways. And so you have to feel really good about what you have moving forward at the leadership spots there. So if you just can, weather the storm with the cap, can get more infusion of talent. As always, when you're strapped for cash, you have to nail the draft picks. You cannot miss on the draft. And so as long as they can evaluate well, as long as they can draft well and start replenishing that room, eventually when those bad contracts come off, that's a time that you can spend money and really take that next step. Because the next step's not coming right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is not an overnight fix for the Falcons. This wasn't just, oh, Dan Quinn was the problem, then we'll be good once Dan Quinn's gone. This is going to be a couple-year thing. And it seems that the Falcons are ahead of schedule, picking fourth overall last year and now possibly making the playoffs the very next year. You have to be excited about that.
Well, yeah, and you talked about the draft. So they're probably going to be in the middle of the draft or maybe a little bit higher. What do you see? I mean, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at McShay's mock draft. I'm not a huge mock draft guy, but at least gives you some different people to think about. Is there anybody that you kind of see the Falcons really targeting there in the draft?
The draft for me becomes a sickness once the season ends. That I do an uncomfortable amount of mock drafts to the point where my wife will come upon me doing more mock drafts, and I think start questioning her decision with me. But it's last year not a great pass rusher draft at all. One of the worst that we've seen in a while. But obviously there was a lot of high ceiling quarterbacks that were available, and it's kind of flipped this year where you have a lot of really good pass rushers available. Something that I would really like to see Atlanta do is take a back somewhere in the second, third, fourth round. There should be some players available there who can really help a team. I love Kenneth Walker. I mean, I know he's who doesn't love Kenneth Walker? He'll be available there in the second round. Spiller out of A&M, you really love what he can do. So getting a guy there, I know that position has been devalued, and getting a Saquon Barkley at 2 or getting an Ezekiel Elliott at 4 is seemingly days gone by. But a lot of these running backs that you see are drafted relatively high. Look what Jonathan Taylor is doing out in Indianapolis. He has completely changed that team. And so getting, I don't want to say a bell cow, I don't want to say a workhorse, but getting a guy that you can trust who's not going to be your Derrick Henry, but can open up your offense a little bit like Arthur Smith would like to have would be great. And as far as with that first round pick, a lot of Falcons fans were tempted to take Fields. Obviously, part of that, he's a local kid from right up 75 North. Obviously, started his career at the University of Georgia. But if you're going to take an heir apparent at quarterback, it'll be really interesting to see who's there. Two guys who I really like. You may have seen the adornments behind me that I hold a degree from the University of Mississippi, so I'm sure a lot of folks will take this with a grain of salt. But Matt Corral is an absolute dude. He went from getting into a fist fight on the field in his first ever start at Ole Miss to he got benched to then having a pretty good year last year, threw a lot of picks, to then not throwing an interception until midway through October of this year. And So he has a very live arm, can throw it down the field extraordinarily well, is very, very good with his feet, competitor, great locker room guy. Sorry to use some obvious coach speak there, but then another guy that I love Kenny Pickett. I
Mm,
I have been trumpeting Kenny Pickett for months. And so
mhm.
I had a lot of issues with how everything went with the Heisman nominees and finalists and how
Mhm.
that all played out. And my God, I don't know. I, I won't get into that, but man, that was a mess.
Well, he's smart. He's a smart guy. I mean, that whole, fake slide and all that.
Yeah, I've never been more conflicted in my life. I said, I love that. I've never thought about that or seen that before, but then also thought, wait, what's the defender going to do there? That's that's kind of I'm glad they fixed that. But you want to talk about a live arm? I mean, Kenny Pickett. It may be a very easy comparison to make, but I'm not talking about what he could or should do in the NFL, but the way that they looked as prospects kind of reminded me a bit of Justin Herbert coming into the draft. And so I know that may seem like a very
Mhm.
easy doppelganger kind of thing to make, but I really love Kenny Pickett. So if you're going to start transitioning a quarterback, you saw what happened. It doesn't happen terribly much anymore, where you let a guy
Mhm.
sit back and learn. Patrick Mahomes learned for a year under Alex Smith. I think he had just one start his rookie year. Aaron
Mhm.
Rodgers sat for a bit. You had Tom Brady, that was obviously years ago, sitting
Mhm.
for a bit behind Drew Bledsoe. And so getting a guy behind Matt Ryan, if you know that that end is coming at some point, and if the Falcons aren't close to contending, you'd like for him to go get a Super Bowl. If there's someone that he can latch on to for one last ride, then you could leave your franchise in good hands. That maybe a Pickett's available when the Falcons are picking. Maybe Corral's available when the Falcons are picking. I don't think you want to reach in that spot. A guy like Malik Willis feels like a reach to me.
Mhm.
Um, Sam Howell
Oh,
feels.
yeah.
You want to talk about sloppy comparisons by me? Sam Howell reminds me of another UNC guy in Trubisky.
I was gonna say that. I as a Bears fan, I stay away from North Carolina quarterbacks, so
So it'll be. I think if you can improve the pass rush, if there's someone there who you think can really help your football team immediately, that is definitely a need. I don't think the Falcons need to keep hemorrhaging first round picks on offensive linemen for the time being, even though that was a prior regime that was doing the evaluating. I do think you need an infusion of talent elsewhere, and so I'd either plan for the future at quarterback in the first round, or I'd go find someone who can get a said quarterback.
yeah, it's going to be interesting. You talk about Corral. I mean, obviously coaching with Lane Kiffin. I mean, that's been huge. If you get him around a good coach, that could be huge. And maybe Arthur Smith is that coach. And you look at everything that Pickett. I mean, it is going to be an interesting draft because McShay. He's not you know projecting a quarterback to go until I think like 12 or 13, I think, with the Steelers, wherever that is at. There are teams up there that are ahead of them that will need quarterbacks. It will just be interesting because that is such an important position. You know, teams do tend to reach with that. And, you know, I don't know if you see the Falcons really, kind of getting afraid and saying they need that franchise quarterback. I mean, they've got Matt Ryan for maybe a year or two, so they don't. I mean, yeah, I don't know how much they worry about reaching.
Yeah, that's that's something with Arthur Blank, that he's not scared to give the green light to go up and get somebody if they really want him. You saw the enormous package that it took to go up and get Julio Jones, and that only
Mhm.
empowers Arthur Blank more to give the green light of seeing how well that panned out. And when it comes to these drafts, I understand this is what Kuiper does, and this is what McShay does, and there's a lot of folks, Walter Football. There's a lot of folks in this space, and it seems like when they don't love the quarterback class, they will push them back into the teens and so forth. But as we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, teams are valuing the quarterback position so highly, and they're willing to admit a mistake more quickly. You saw the Cardinals move on from Josh Rosen, who they
Yeah.
took in the first round the very next year to go take Kyler Murray. That teams aren't as scared to say, you know what, we screwed up that position, let's try again. And so I just don't see the top 10 coming and going without a quarterback in play unless it becomes sort of an interesting situation where some teams are picking high enough they need a quarterback, like say the Detroit Lions. But there's obviously a couple pass rushers there from Oregon and Michigan and Thibodeau and Hutchinson who were there for the taking. That there may be teams who find themselves in the top 10 who don't need a quarterback at the time. Is the only way I could see it really falling that way. But the Falcons could package some stuff up and move up, or they could wait patiently like the Patriots did. Everyone was talking, are the Patriots going to go all the way up to 3? Are the Patriots working out a deal with Atlanta at 4? And they just sat back, let the board play out how it did, and got their guy who looks to be the best rookie quarterback in the NFL thus far. You could make a pretty strong argument for, even though it's a lot of dinking and dunking. He's being efficient. So the Falcons could also take a look at that and hope it plays out. But if I was running the franchise, I don't think, unless I absolutely fell in love with someone who I had to have, sort of like what the happened with the Chiefs with Mahomes, where they didn't need a quarterback and they were back in the draft but fell in love with him, so they traded up with the Bills to go grab him. There are enough holes on the Falcons that you need draft capital, especially when you can't go out and be the highest bidder for someone in free agency. So it's been likened to the lottery, where as many draft picks as you have, that's how many lottery tickets you have. And so I would keep stockpiling those and try and fill holes as I could.
Well, that's huge too. As a Bears fan, you kind of look at like Fields and him playing this year. That the debate was, do we play him with such a leaky and not a very good offensive line? And if you were to spend that high draft capital on a Corral or a Pickett, and I mean, what do you do even if you trade Matt Ryan? I mean, do you throw him behind a line that you can't trust?
Yeah, and you've seen that with a lot of young quarterbacks, especially with Tua Tagovailoa, with maybe the only offensive line that's worse than what we're seeing here in Atlanta. About what that's done with his development. Now, of course, they finally got it rolling a bit, but not a ton of time to throw the ball, not a lot of time to be in a good situation, feel comfortable. Mac Jones behind a pretty good offensive line, and that makes things a lot easier. And you saw the Patriots with a rookie quarterback about to come in, go out and get Jonnu Smith, go out and get Hunter Henry. Tight ends make young quarterbacks' life a whole lot easier. So you're right. That is something that you have to be really cognizant of is, do we want to put back there and have him running for his life a bit? It ruined David Carr. David Carr was not a bust like some people may have labeled David Carr. David Carr had a high ceiling. David Carr had a ton of ability. And David Carr very well could have been he could still be in the league now.
Yeah.
He's been a very successful NFL quarterback. It was a mess when he got to Houston. I think they used their first pick in the expansion draft on Tony Baselli, but Tony Baselli wasn't exactly a spring chicken by the time he got to Houston. And so it was just it just wasn't a good situation for David Carr. And I don't know if that would be a good situation walking in, but I don't think no matter who they drafted, it wouldn't be someone that they can't move on from Matt Ryan. Whether they want to or not, I just don't think that they'd be able to. So he would be sitting for a year. So you'd like to think, okay, we've got some time to try and fix this. Be it through the draft, be it through savvy free agent moves, be it through just development. And so that's kind of your only hope in that regard.
So, yeah, I mean, speaking of hope, I mean, with Matt Ryan's numbers, I mean, is there hope going into next year with him? Is this starting quarterback? I mean, I'm not, talking about Super Bowl hope, but I mean, is there hope for him to at least be a productive, starting quarterback? Or, I mean, you get Ridley back, or what is the hope with him, even another year?
Yeah, I think you definitely see the end coming. It's not a Peyton Manning. I don't see this year And who knows what next year will be, because you
Mhm.
see Father Time come for everyone except for the dude down in Tampa Bay at one point or another. And you saw it with Drew Brees. Oh my God, you saw it with Peyton Manning
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Denver. John Elway, not
Mhm.
terrific toward the end. Big Ben he played fantastic against the Vikings
He
in
did.
that fourth quarter, and he has his moments this year. He's been a pretty good fourth quarter quarterback overall this season, but otherwise, there's just some plays that are rough to watch, and you hope that Matt Ryan doesn't find that point. You saw it with Eli Manning,
Mhm.
who draws a lot of similarities to Matt Ryan, and you saw him start to struggle. And he had a really, really bad offensive line toward the end of his career. Again, the I want to say, but you didn't really see that final Drew Brees year, that final Peyton Manning year with,
Yeah.
and you hope you don't see that with Matt. But I do think that if they can rectify some things as far as weapons for him, as far as the offensive line is concerned, that he's not blameless
Yeah.
at all. But I still think that there's a little bit of tread left on those tires, especially with a guy who's a really, really strong uh, offensive tactician. Like,
Mhm. So there's really no possibility that Matt Ryan would be like, this has been great and retire and hang him up.
I mean, he very well could. It seems that most of the early retirements come out of Detroit.
True,
But
very true.
who knows with Matt. It's I personally think about it like what Steve Nash did with the Lakers, where a lot of folks were saying, "Hey, just retire. You're not playing great. You're hurt all the time. Please hang it up." And Steve Nash said something along the lines of, "I will never make this much money in a year doing anything for the rest of my life."
Mhm.
And with the amount of money that Matt Ryan is set to make, who knows? Arthur Blank has done just fine in his life with Home Depot and other enterprises that I'm sure that he can make some things right with Matt if that's where both sides want to go, is toward a mutual retirement, or if Matt just wants to hang it up. So who knows? It's so up in the air, and it's such a hotly debated thing down here where it comes to um, a common refrain is "It's not Matt's fault." You hear that,
Wow. Yeah.
where uh, this city, like many, can be, and it's much maligned for its sports fans, and sometimes we do deserve that. Uh, I I don't think in my entire lifetime in Atlanta I've seen an Atlanta Hawks bumper sticker or license plate. Uh, Most of the NBA has forgotten about the Hawks. Atlanta's definitely forgotten about the Hawks. Um,
Even with Trey Young. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, everyone loves Red Velvet and everyone loves Trey Young, but it's it's very interesting. You don't see people really gathering at bars to watch Hawks games, but in this city, we are kind of loyal to the end with
Mhm.
guys, and you saw it with Chipper as he got gray in his goatee. This city has loved Chipper throughout and still loves Chipper, and of course
Mhm.
he's still here, a big part of the city, big part of Atlanta. And the city about had an uprising back when we did care about the Hawks, when Dominique was traded out.
Oh, yeah.
But Bonnie Jones, big Atlanta sports guy, still talks about that to this day. Um, and so it's there's a couple different factions when it comes to Matt. It's please Matt, hang it up, and others saying what else do you want Matt to do? So it's very interesting. You think about the years with Tony Gonzalez and with Roddy White and with Julio as the young guy on the team, and seeing those great teams under Mike Smith, and then of course the Super Bowl run, and just had it. And as much as everyone hated it for the city, and as much pain as it was, and as much as everyone hated the 28-3 memes and flags that people in Boston fly outside their homes still to this
Mhm.
day, and that it had to be that team and
Yep.
that guy and offensive genius Kyle Shanahan not understanding when to run the football.
It's so ironic now, isn't it?
I know. And but as much as everyone hated everything to do with that, there was a very common sentiment here that people hated that for Matt. That
Mhm.
everyone wanted that for Matt. That was MVP year. That was he's stayed in this city. He's beloved in the city. And seeing that, and you thought maybe next year you get back and finish the job, and it hasn't even been close.
Mhm.
And so there are still people who say, "Hey, no, don't blame Matt. What can he do for this, that, and the other?" And there's other people saying, "Let's turn the page. You know, he's a cap hit of over $40 million next year. Let's turn the page."
Yeah, when you look at dollars, I mean that's another discussion, and that's probably the biggest one. It is tough. When you look at the quarterback position, uh, as a Bears fan, I know that. I mean, it's tough to look at what is next. I mean, even living here in Wisconsin with Aaron Rodgers with all of his drama, this over the offseason, and I had friends that were like, "Oh, Aaron, he's a drama, all this, and that," and I'm like, as soon as he's back, as soon as he's winning, you are going to be right back on it because here's the thing, Jordan Love he's not the answer. I mean, he may be serviceable, but he's not going to be Aaron Rodgers. And, Matt Ryan, whereas he's probably not as good, not the Matty Ice that he was, he still at least has that the elite talent, right?
Yeah, and there's something to be said about you have to understand when your arm is declining,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that quarterbacks don't realize, and they're usually the last one to realize when that happens of, "Hey, I can't hit that out route as sharp as I used to. That ball's getting picked off and taken back to the house now." And once you can kind of understand where your game is at and win that game with your years of experience and with your mind, um, that's how you can prolong your career. I mean, Tom Brady still has a bit in his arms. I probably should stop eating strawberries if that's good for him. But uh, arm talent isn't like an explosive arm isn't everything you need. Brock Osweiler didn't exactly light the world on fire. Jamarcus Russell didn't exactly light the world on fire. Ryan Mallett wasn't some savior that some thought that he was going to be coming out of Arkansas. But with Matt, you still have years of quarterback play to draw upon, years of experience to draw upon, and you have an offensive coach that you can work hands on with to say, okay, this is where we're all at. This is how we need to go about and win games. And so I do think that there is still something there where I don't. While I would be fine if they go and draft the heir apparent as long as it's the right guy,
Mm-hmm.
I would still want him to sit and learn and develop under Matt and also get to a point where the franchise is at the right spot to make that transition, which wouldn't be next year, in my opinion, for the reasons that you mentioned. Um, so I do think that I don't want to say cautious optimism, but I do think there are some still positives to draw upon with Matt moving forward.
Well, yeah, and he hasn't necessarily had that running style like a Cam Newton who's fallen off a cliff, and doesn't seem to kind of know necessarily that he maybe doesn't have what he had, and part of it was because of his style and everything. Matt Ryan has not had that style. I mean, he's been the pocket passer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Cam Newton now is still faster and a better runner than 22-year-old Matt Ryan.
Mhm.
It's it's different games age differently, and that's what a lot of folks talk about. With a lot of the young running quarterbacks like a Lamar Jackson, like a Josh Allen, is we're worried about Cam Newton, where it looks like he was, getting hit by a truck every time he's out there, and he's always bandaged up, bodied up, and you see how that ages. Where I think Cam Newton is in his early 30s, and
Mhm.
if you put him next to Tom Brady and say, hey, one of these guys is a decade older than the other, say, oh, it's Cam Newton, but no, so it's his game does play to that, and as long as he has some semblance of self-awareness that, hey, those throws that I used to try and be a little risky on down the field or across the field or from different platforms when I was younger, I can't do that anymore.
Mhm.
It's sort of like when you have an old dog who used to be able to run for hours chasing tennis balls at the park, now can give you a couple good runs there, but understands to himself, hey, I'm not that same dog that I used to be. And right now, Matt Ryan's he's a bit of an old dog, and so hopefully he realizes to stop chasing that tennis ball after a while.
Yeah, and maybe you kind of look at with another year with Arthur Smith offense, maybe they can really kind of do something, and continue to get pieces. And one piece that I did want to bring up, seemed to be solid, and is the kicking position. Is it Young Wei Koo, right?
Yeah,
Is
another
he
local guy.
okay? Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Georgia Southern product. Um, he's a fan favorite
Hmm.
in Atlanta. They just had a picture of him today in some enormous pants, like just triple the size of MC Hammer's biggest pants he ever had. And just out there, fans love him. He's a reliable kicker.
Hmm.
That's something that's vitally important, as you see that that's kind of de-emphasized at a lot of different levels with schools not offering scholarships, uh,
Mm.
teams usually not even drafting the kicker that they have, and a lot of teams see that as a replaceable position. That it's almost like fantasy owners do with streaming defenses. That some teams believe that they can just stream kickers,
Hmm.
and that's something Atlanta's been kind of lucky about with having kickers for long periods of time, be it Bryant, be it Anderson, and so forth. And so Young Wei Koo is beloved here. He's an Atlanta icon at this point. So that's definitely something to feel good about on that end.
Well, yeah. I mean, he had the off season. What is it? His car was broken into, and he was just worried about his shoes, right?
Yeah. And I think if anyone tries to break into Young Wei Koo's car again, he's gonna have an entire city out on the manhunt for that individual. We'll all get helicopters, the newscopters out. We'll find who did that to Young Wei. How dare they?
How dare they? Well, this has been great. I definitely appreciate your time. When you talk about the Falcons, how far? I mean, is it 3, 4, 5 years you think away from the Super Bowl?
It all depends on how they're able to draft. Right now they're in cap jail, and it's
Mhm.
not going to last forever.
Mhm.
And once they break out of that, they'll be able to play the game like everyone else. And uh, gosh, it seems like no one's really played it better than the Browns. You feel like they make signings and big trades every offseason, yet the next offseason rolls around and they still seem to have those guys and cap space. I don't know. I don't know if they're cooking the books. They seem to have it figured out. But once the Falcons get out of that cap jail, and they will, that'll free them up tremendously. So right now it's about developing the guys that you have. Some of the guys on the roster you may not want, but it's the guys that you have, and it's better than the options that you can
Mhm.
go get off the scrap heap. And it's all about drafting well. They've hit on a couple draft picks lately. I mean, Kyle Pitts is a hit, Terrell's a hit, uh, so it's really about identifying and drafting well. And I I don't think the Super Bowl will come with Matt. I think that'll be outside of his window, unfortunately. But if you can find a rookie deal quarterback,
Mhm.
that's when you can really build out your team. That's that's something that always scares you is teams get so scared of not having a quarterback that they overpay and lock themselves into a mediocre quarterback.
Mhm.
And sometimes they'll even have a really good quarterback and lock it in, and then everyone around them leaves. We saw
Mhm.
what the Seahawks were doing, Russell Wilson, early on in his career when he was on his rookie deal, and he was just surrounded by it seemed like a super team around him,
Mhm.
especially on the defensive side. And then you said, "Oh, they re-signed Russell to that big deal. That's great, but why is he leaving? Why is he leaving? Why is he?" And so find a guy like Josh Allen. They were able to build out that team when he was on his before he got his extension. Patrick Mahomes, before he got his extension, they were able to supplant that team with a ton of talent. Same with Lamar Jackson and on and on. So that's weirdly enough where it seems to be your window, where you used to think, oh, it's when you have the veteran quarterback, your veteran guy who can win those games for you in the cold in January. And now it seems to be, hey, if you find a young guy who's good enough, who had good enough coaching in college, who we can put pieces around him that we can go and spend on a receiver, we can go spend on a left tackle, we can go and spend on a pass rusher, a corner, middle linebacker, so forth, and build this team out, that's when you're honestly your most dangerous. And so if the Falcons can hit on their next quarterback, develop him well, and then surround him with enough, I mean, you can see them springing back up sooner than later, because the one guy that you don't have to worry about age, the one guy that you don't have to worry about a cap situation, is that guy patrolling the headset,
Mm-hmm.
throwing the red flags. So as long as they have that right, they can draft well, develop well, and surround that new young quarterback. I think you could see it in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Well, being in Georgia, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the Bulldogs. So, speaking of dangerous, how dangerous are they in the playoff? And do you at least have a little bit of hope that they can, get to the championship game?
I am so fascinated by this year. I too got the fatigue of the same few teams, and it was some semblance of, okay, Alabama's there, Oklahoma's there, Clemson's there, Ohio State's there. And so having a team like Cincinnati, that fascinates me in my own right, because how much more David versus Goliath can you get? That not only do you finally get that group of 5 team in that had to have every single thing happen right for them, but guess who's waiting on you? The biggest dynasty we've seen in the modern era of college football. You have Nick Saban in the Heisman winner waiting for you on the other side of the field. And so I'll be really interested to see that. It's I think a 2 touchdown spread at this point. Does the game unfold that way? John Mechie's not going to be playing for Alabama. So we'll see what shakes out there. Will Desmond Ridder win out in the end there? And then on the other side, Michigan Georgia is going to be a fantastic game.
Yeah,
that's the thing is you were always curious. This year, Georgia never had a great win. They beat 9-3 Kentucky. They beat 9-3 Clemson. They really were missing, I think, 8-4 Arkansas. But they didn't really have that signature win that you can point to. Cincinnati can go, we beat Notre Dame. Michigan go, we beat Ohio State. Alabama can say, we beat Georgia. And you always worried about Georgia if they would have the firepower on offense to be able to win a shootout. Because even though they have that horrifying defense with a lot of pros, and they've been recruiting at such a high level, especially on that side of the ball, for years and years, that this all finally comes together. You say, hey, what if everything clicks? What if we get all these guys on the field and they develop right, and they're all on the field at the same time? And you saw that this year where they were giving up, I believe, less than a touchdown a game through the first 12 games. But what happens when the other team's offense just has your number that day? Are you going to be able to keep up with them? And Georgia couldn't. Stetson Bennett, I mean, he's been much maligned by Georgia fans all year, which you thought was crazy for a 12-0 football team. But Michigan's got a good offense. I believe Gaddis just won the Broyles Award, and they've got a good quarterback. They always seem to be able to get guys in space. The Big Ten championship game had to scare the absolute hell out of Georgia watching that.
Well, it's interesting though. Being an Iowa guy, and that Iowa's definitely not on Georgia's level. It is going to be an interesting matchup. I mean, they talked about, especially in the Ohio State game, the offensive line of Michigan, that versus Georgia defensively. That's going to be an interesting matchup, because if Michigan can run, that'll be huge. But if, Georgia can take away that run, you talk about, Michigan's quarterback. They've got a quarterback, but they also shuffle another one in, and they just don't really have that big quarterback that Alabama has. So for me, I see Georgia having the edge there because of that. Michigan ran all over Iowa, but Iowa doesn't have, anything close to really a good quarterback. They've got someone who's there basically. And so that's the thing. In Michigan, they've got a quarterback. That'll be the key. Can that, quarterback actually step up? I see Georgia winning. It'll be interesting to see kind of that rematch. In my mind, I see it being a Georgia-Alabama rematch, and that would be an interesting. Obviously, no one wants to see a second game, but I just see it going that way.
Yeah, this is the first time. Last year, no one stood a chance against Alabama.
Yep.
You used to see Chip Kelly win a lot of games at Oregon with that new interesting scheme, but he had lesser talent.
Mm-hmm.
But he was able to get guys in space, had a lot of speed all over the field. And you always thought, if you're able to beat teams with more talent than you with this sort of scheme, what happens when the teams with the most talent take a similar scheme?
Mm-hmm.
And you saw that with Alabama last year, who was just an absolute nightmare. And for most of the year, they didn't have Jalen Waddle on the field.
Yeah.
The number 6 pick in the draft wasn't on the field for most of the year. And so for this year, I have no idea who's going to win forever. I didn't think Alabama stood a chance, especially after the Iron against Georgia. And then Alabama goes out, and after spotting Georgia 10 points, looked like the far, far superior team. And so while I think Georgia will win, I don't want to say handily, but maybe by 10, 14 points over a Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
If Michigan wins that game, it's not going to surprise me at all. I think Georgia will win that game, but Michigan could win that game. Michigan could beat Alabama. Michigan could beat Cincinnati. I could see a scenario where Cincinnati beats Alabama. Alabama had, sure, you give Nick Saban a month to prepare for it.
Yeah.
You saw Alabama struggle with Auburn, and also Jordan Hare is a tough place to play, but Cincinnati's better than Auburn. Cincinnati's got a really great quarterback. They've got NFL players across that defense, particularly in the secondary. I don't know if Cincinnati can win it all, but there's definitely a path there. Obviously, there's a 13-0 football team. They beat Notre Dame in South Bend. And so I could not be more excited to watch that playoff, because really anything can happen there. And it could be Cincinnati. You have one fan base who wins so many titles that a lot of them can't tell you, wait, which team was he on?
Yep.
That team that won that title or that title? 3 teams that if they win the title this year, that will be a team that goes down in lore. Here in Georgia, the Dogs, every single rival they have has won a title more recently. Of course, Florida's won 3 since Georgia's last won one. Tennessee won in 1998 with T. Martin. Clemson was a pseudo rival of the Dogs, more of a early 20th century rival of the Dogs, has won 3 since Georgia's won 1. You have Georgia Tech won the 1990 national title.
That's right.
Auburn won in 2010. If you're a rival of Georgia, you've won a title recently. And so to get one after 40 years going without one, that would be huge for Georgia fans. I don't think any of them, even if they make it to the title game, are bringing champagne to their watch parties, because they've seen this happen before.
Yeah, you kind of hope for the best, but expect, you don't want to let yourself down.
Yeah, we live in a state of expecting doom to come at some point with all sports teams here in Atlanta, and so it'll be fascinating. It very well could be the Dogs' year, but I know as Dogs fans hear that, they're covering their ears and saying, please, please, please stop.
Hey, this could be the year with the Braves and everything, so you never know.
That's right. Stars are aligning.
Well, you could talk, sports, football, and I definitely appreciate your time. And everyone can find you where again?
Yeah, you can. We are wherever podcasts can be found, on iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Plays, on and on. We're the Spaghetti Junction Boys. You can find us on Twitter at SJB Atlanta, and you can also find us on our website, sjbatlanta.com.
Perfect. Thanks again. I definitely appreciate your time. Once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series, and we'll catch you next episode. Thanks again.